Chapter 7, Adapt Curriculum Framework for Different Settings. Structures and regulations have little to do with children's passion to learn. Often the daily demands that we experience in group care settings limit the opportunities for children and adults to be reflective about their learning. Adults need to examine and negotiate real life and learning to standards and regulations. So how do you adapt curriculum frameworks to your context? Well, let's take a look at the principles in Chapter 7 to help us do that. Principle 1, focus your documentation on the process. Make a documentation of all the children exploring, discovering, inventing, and learning, and make it readily available for the children to view themselves. Make sure that you include pictures and then written documentation as well. Focus on the learning process and not on the topics that are being discovered or explored, but really on the process itself. And there's a good example on page 176 of Chapter 7 titled Color Mixing. Principle 2, invent new ways to meet requirements. Look for the intent behind the requirements. Requirements are often generally written and very broad, and these requirements are sometimes interpreted in limited ways, and there is no focus on the learning process. And this particularly happens and can be a problem with those that are not trained in the ECE field that often implement regulations, such as community care licensing analysts who come from public safety and public health fields and not from early childhood, or child development permitted site supervisors and program directors that aren't really very well versed in early childhood, but get their permits as a result of alternative options in the permitting process. Principle 3, expand the possibilities of prescribed curriculum. Traditionally, planning focused on themes to teach particular context or content. Later, the approach changed to focusing on domains of learning like math, science, literacy, etc. Well, focus now is on exploring the children's thinking skills and interests. So create an investigation or a studio area where children can really go into deep depth about particular things that they're interested in. Allow the possibility of long-term projects. Formulate questions and gather materials to answer the questions that the children might have. And utilize planning webs like the ones you can find on page 181, and explore the vignette or example on open-ended materials that you can find on page 185. Principle 4, document everyday experiences that meet the standards. So nurture investigation and intelligence, not just academic skills. Academic skill learning really focuses on drill and practice and memorization, which is really just vertical learning, like climbing the rungs of a ladder. Where intelligence learning focuses on understanding of the meaning of the skills and their related ideas, which is called horizontal or lateral learning. And this is really the basis for the vertical learning. You can think of it as a ladder. The vertical learning is a ladder. But if you don't have a solid surface, a horizontal surface underneath that ladder, it's going to be off balance, and that vertical learning is not going to mean anything. So an example, the vertical learning approach is to memorize math facts, but it often does not include the horizontal learning information of how addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division build on each other and what that relationship means. This can also be applied to literacy. Vertical learning in literacy might be memorizing letters and sounds, but it often does not include horizontal learning of the value of reading in everyday life, like a whole language might provide for children if you use that process of labeling items in the classroom and then having the children dictate language and having the adult write it down and then read it back to them. And you can find some examples of this in Chapter 7 by looking at Math Snacks on page 187. Principle 5, make assessment relevant and meaningful. Use developmental continuums and checklists alone. Do not touch on the complexity of the learning. Use of developmental continuums and checklists alone or by themselves do not touch on the complexity of the learning process. Use multiple measures in the context of everyday classroom investigation and exploration. So don't just do checklists or DRDPs, but also use other means of documentation, like anecdotal observations or running records or time samples to help you explore the learning process. In documentation, make sure you demonstrate knowledge and understanding, that horizontal and lateral learning, and capture significant moments. Principle 6, seek different perspectives to inform planning. So avoid letting the teacher agenda misplace what the children are really interested in, or have that teacher agenda interfere with exploration and discovery. Observe with an eye for the details. Avoid the shallow interpretations of children's interest in bugs in general, when the interest is really in the hidden wings of ladybugs. And read that story, Bugs versus Ladybugs, on page 197 of your text. Make sure to build the children's confidence in their own ideas and initiative. And you can actually do this if you're really taking seriously their questions and their interests. And keep in mind that for preschool children, the stage of cognitive development that they're in is initiative, they're in pre-operational thought, but the stage of social emotional development they're in is initiative. Principle 7, learn from conflicting ideas. Following the children's lead can be controversial. So negotiate by using conversations with resistant adults regarding the value of children problem solving through investigation and discovery and materials provided by adults that can support that problem solving with workable options without telling the children what to do. And take a look at a controversy that addresses this issue on page 200 called contamination.